Hey, I'm Tanmay. I'll be your last speaker for today. Don't worry, I'll keep the session short and everything. Uh, I'll start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
I mean, okay, cool. So if you face any lag or anything, just let me know. I'll kill the video feed. And then we can just, I can just share my screen because that's just the slides actually are required. So, okay, to introduce myself, I'm Tanmay. I'm the community manager for Dev Cluster. I have over 4,000 edits on Wikipedia. Write, I have written about my alma mater GEC on various places. Quora people know me a lot for, and they still quote one of my answers that I had written in first year to me. Flex alert, thanks, people. What else? I work at persistent systems. That is what pays the bills, and so to speak. I work as a full stack developer. That is, I work with both front end and back end. And so, just before I begin, I want to know if so I'll be talking about JavaScript, the whole ecosystem at a very basic level. But is anyone here a working professional? Can you just reply on the chat if you are? Just okay, one. If you are a working professional, just reply in the chat. So I just want to know because in case I need to take it up a notch or not. So if there are a lot of, if most of the crowd is working, then obviously this will be a bit too basic for you. Okay, I see only 2 or 3 people till now. Fine. So okay, then I've designed it at a pretty decent level then. Cool. Let's begin. So yeah. So why JavaScript? What is it? Or rather, why do we need JavaScript for our web pages? So can anyone answer, or should I just? This is, by the way, not the first time I'm talking remotely or conducting a session remotely. In October, right? In October, I was sitting in Chennai and I delivered a session at GEC. I had attended a conference and I was just double booked and I really didn't keep a proper calendar and I said yes to everyone. And then I had to tell Twishi that, hey, I'll just join you over video calls. So it was not as embarrassing as I think it was, but yeah, that's how things go sometimes. But there it was even worse because there was an audience. There was a hall full of audience, and they still didn't ask any questions, or they didn't say anything. So yeah, moving on. Why the need for JavaScript arose? So using HTML, you can create structure and content for your web pages. So you basically put all you give it structure, like you say that, okay, a paragraph, this is what a paragraph is, and this is what the paragraph should hold. This is the heading of that paragraph. This is what the heading should say. Then people realized, okay, we want to make it look good. So they started using CSS. That is, CSS adds styles and layout. So you add your own custom styles and you say, okay, I want my web page to look like this. But both of these remain pretty much static, and your web pages were not very interactive with the users. They were just relaying information to the users, but they were not interacting with the user much. That is why JavaScript was born. rather the need for JavaScript arose. JavaScript adds interactivity and behavior to your web pages. Uh, yes, I have mentioned this already. While the first two are mostly static, nowadays there is a lot of components and everything. One specific thing that I need to mention now before, so I'm not going to cover any syntax today, so don't, so sorry about that if you're expecting, but I'll just make all the points about JavaScript clear. So while vanilla JavaScript, that is the normal JavaScript we use, is only client side, all the frameworks and everything, frameworks, libraries, etc., that you use for creating web applications, they all work. They need a server side application also of the JavaScript. Like the client side is not enough. The client side will again just show the content to the user, but it won't pull the required content from the server. So what we do is we use a client, we use what is called a runtime environment. So Node.js is one such runtime environment for JavaScript. Okay. And this Node.js gives a server-side capability to JavaScript, and by creating an environment in which that JavaScript, which usually runs only on the client side, it can run on the server also now. And that is why the first thing that you need to do while creating any Angular app or React app is you need to download Node.js first, and then you start your Node server first, and through that you start your web app. Right. So moving on, if you have any doubts, then just, are there any doubts till now? No, okay. If you have any doubt, just let me know in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. Fine, frameworks and libraries. So does anyone know the difference between these? So in JavaScript, they talk a lot about these, and this is what you'll primarily be working with. So does anyone know or want to talk about the difference? I'll take that as a no. Okay. So a library is something that your program, the program that you write, makes use of. And a framework is what your framework makes use of the program that you write, rather. So putting it in simpler words, in a library, you use the capabilities of the library in that case when you're using a library. And rather in a framework, what is there is you have to first understand how the framework's layout is, where which part of the code goes. And then you fit in within that fixed box, rather, I would say, or boxes. So you put your code within the boxes, within that framework that is provided to you. If you start coding by yourself, you create, while using a framework, you can't just create your own ad hoc folders or anything, and the way components interact with each other, none of that works. You have to follow the fixed format of things. So does anyone know which one React falls into? Or is it a library or a framework? I'll look at the chat now. I'll take some names. React. Okay, when I say predefined pattern means, I'll explain about those predefined patterns next. So there are different ways in which frameworks and all work, and why there is a need for that. Yes, React is a library as opposed to what most people think. What about Angular? Angular is a framework, right? And jQuery? jQuery is still quite popular. I don't know why, but 70% of web pages still use jQuery, it seems. So jQuery is, for those of you who have never used it, it's like normal JavaScript, exactly like normal JavaScript, but you just have a smaller, easier syntax to use. Okay. So yes, jQuery and React are both libraries, whereas stuff like Angular and Vue is the frameworks. Anything else? Yes, jQuery is a simplified JS library. So people don't want to type those whole long JavaScript commands or function names, so they use jQuery instead. That's the only big use of jQuery actually. That's the reason it's so popular. Right. So next up comes in a concept called separation of concern, wherein we have something called a MVW, model view whatever. So why this arose is because we want to separate the UI, that is the part that interacts with the user, the part that the user sees and interacts with. We want to separate that with the part that is used to generate that. So for example, you have the first one is always model view controller. So model view controllers are used in client server applications mainly. And what happens here is you have a model which actually interacts with the data. And then you have a view which interacts with the user. And the model, obviously, since it's working with the data, it works with the server, and the view is on the client side. And in between these two, you have something called a controller, which is like an interface on the model, which the view can interact with. So that is what MVC pattern is. Then you had something called model view presenter, which is used by thick clients. Not very important to know, but just for knowledge purposes. Another common one is model view model. That is, you have the model and you have the view. And then you have a third thing called a view model, as you can see here. Is my cursor visible?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thanks. Yeah. So view model is basically it is a component in which lets the view directly interact with the model, and it's not exactly an interface. It closely binds the model and the view together. So that why they do this is because it is very useful for single page applications. Single page applications, I don't think I've covered in my presentations, but I'll explain anyway. So what happens in an SPA is you have one single page that is running, and that adds that makes it very fast actually. So there's only one page. Otherwise, in a normal client server application, each separate page is loads it by getting pulled from the server onto your client side. In SPAs are faster because there's only one page that is always loading, and just the components on that page, the different parts of that page, they keep changing according to where you're browsing around. Of course, it does make it a little bit more complicated because you have to take care of routing and everything, even more attention you have to pay to. For example, you want to move from /about to /contact, you have to, on your web page, you need to take extra care of that, especially while on the production server. Like Vipul could explain this to you while we were doing our about dev cluster website. For our routing was not working at the beginning, so we had to create a separate. We had to go in the Apache configs and everything. That's right. Next main thing in the JavaScript ecosystem, yes, TypeScript and JSX. So these are the two. I'm not going to do a versus because there's not exactly a versus for these two things. It's more of not a comparison. It's more like these are two different things that you can use. So TypeScript, as we know, is used by Angular, mainly by Angular, and JSX is mainly used by React. Although you can code Angular using JavaScript also, not recommended, but you can do it. It's very long to do, and you can code in React using TypeScript also. So they are supporting each other in some way. JSX is, I'll explain now what they are. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. That is, it adds on to features that JavaScript lacks. For example, classes and inheritance is the biggest thing. So in JavaScript, you have, in normal JavaScript rather, that is ES5, you have only objects, and classes you don't exactly define. You can create object instances and all that. But using TypeScript, you can create a class, and all of us are very comfortable with object-oriented programming because that's what we learn in college, right? We either learn Java or C++, which are perfectly object-oriented languages, and you're used to creating classes for your main data points and using objects for instantiating those instances of those data. So that's one big, so that is a superset. So superset means it has all the features of JavaScript plus some more extra features. JSX on the other hand is called, is JavaScript extended. It's an extension of JS. Rather, it has syntactic sugar. So what they refer to as syntactic sugar means more intuitive syntax. So for example, instead of writing a long, big JavaScript function to call something, you can just create, in JSX notation, you can create a class and export that class. And then so you can say, so if you want to suppose say, I'll give a very simple example, React components, okay? So you can create a React component in normal JavaScript by saying react.component use and all of that. And it's like a 6-line piece of code. Whereas if you use the JSX syntax, it's like just one line that says use React, and it is put in the I forgot what those tags are, but those braces and the ones that HTML uses, lesser than and greater than, it's used within those braces, and it basically looks like an HTML tag. So that's what all your components are, just like intuitive HTML tags that you use. So suppose you can create your own custom button, call it my custom button, and import that as a JavaScript, as it looks like an HTML tag. What else here? Right. Only modern browsers understand JSX, and TypeScript or JavaScript extended both are generally transpiled into vanilla JS. So before they are put to your browser, what actually happens is you can write your code in either of these, and you don't have to worry about the long JavaScript that you have to write. But what generally happens is that you have something called a transpiler, which transforms transforms and compiles that particular language's code into normal JavaScript. And all browsers understand normal JavaScript right from like the mid 1990s. Any browser understands JavaScript. Of course, some standards and all are there, but all browsers understand JavaScript. But nowadays, the latest versions of Chrome and Firefox, they do support JSX. So you can try it out in your browser console and try typing some JSX. It works, and if you have the latest version of Chrome or Firefox. So because JavaScript, JSX rather, is just JavaScript only, just the more new standard. So some browsers, some very old browsers don't support it. I don't think Internet Explorer supports it. And I know that people look down upon Internet Explorer, but the thing is that while you're creating websites, you always have to be worried about trying to reach each and every user of yours. So suppose your user does not have any other browser on his system except Internet Explorer, because it comes default in the old version of Windows. You have to accept that, and you have to make your website compatible for Internet Explorer and older browsers also. So that is why you have to take care of these, what we call as backward compatibility. Yes, final thoughts before I wind up. I just want to rely more on the doubts and questions rather than just give a talk. So final thoughts, to get started with JavaScript programming, all you need is a text editor and a web browser like Chrome. The web browser, obviously, to run your JavaScript that you write in the text editor. familiarize yourself with the browser's developer tools, basically for debugging. Debugging is basically going through step by step of your code and understanding at each step what is happening in your code. Like you may be passing a variable, it gets updated, at which step it gets updated to what value. That is how you trace errors in your code, or not even trace errors. You can even reverse engineer a code that way. So when you are given a piece of code to work with, sometimes you don't always know how to work with it, because the original developer may not be he may not even be working with you anymore. He may not be available at that time. So you'll have to basically break your head and understand how that original code works. So debugging is always useful. Learn how to debug properly. Learn specifically for web applications and JavaScript. Learn how to use the browser's developer tools. Use Chrome dev tools, Firefox dev tools. Even Edge has pretty good web tool that I have used. As I said, even when you're developing website, you have to think of all web browsers. So I've used on Edge also. Use an interactive code editor like VS Code, because you can just add extensions in that, and it supports any language then. But of course, now they are slowly trying to. If you have heard of Replit, REPL.it, it is an online code editor, and again, you don't have to download anything. So that is their USP. Why these extensions are useful? Yeah. So for example, when I was working with React, instead of typing out a whole React component, I would just write RFC, and it would suggest, and it would give me a drop down that would suggest to, and then I'd hit enter, and it would just give me the basic code of a React functional component, RFC. So example, these kind of extensions are very useful for quick programming, rather when you're creating really big files, really big projects and everything. Lastly, I think, try and unit test your code. JavaScript, for example, has a lot of unit testing frameworks. Depending on the type of JavaScript you're using, the language, for example, Angular, React. React works good with Jest. Jest works for most, but people still use Jasmine and Mocha and all of that. So whichever testing framework you want to use, learn any one properly, the one that works with the language that you're currently using. And this is not just for JavaScript, by the way. Even okay, there's a question. How to get started with testing and how to go about it? Should I worry about learning it as I learn just when I actually need it or something? So ideally nobody. Ideally, not actually ideally everyone should learn testing right when you start coding, but in the real world, sadly, nobody tests their code. That's the sad truth, and it's happening, and even working professional don't do it. Take my word for it. So I'm just suggesting that you do it because it can make your life a lot more easier, because instead of blindly writing code, what you will end up doing is you will understand what the code needs to do, how you need to do it, and that is only when you can you'll understand it only after you write a test case properly, because the test case will give you the exact parameters for or rather a unit test case. Okay, so if you, I don't know how many of you are in first year, so you won't know what unit testing is, but I think second years and third years onwards, everyone knows that unit testing, in that what you do is you divide your code into small units, and you test each unit. And then after that, you do an integration test in which you test how all these units combined work with each other. But but what you try and do is you try and reduce the errors and at each small piece of code, at every unit rather. And if you reduce the errors in every unit, you as a whole, by and large, you do reduce a lot of the errors that you would get in the overall project, in the overall product. Did I answer your question, Vipul? Kind of. Okay. How to get started with testing? Okay. Neil has a question. Speaking as a recent, can you see the questions on my screen, or actually you guys can see the questions, so I won't read it out. But yes, so I will how so simplest thing would be to say that web development is not dead, just that the things that you use for web development are keep changing. For example, you may not still use PHP, or the job that you apply for may not use PHP, mm, but JavaScript, I would say, is still very much relevant, because everyone needs an application for their product, because that's where everyone interacts with the products, right? They either interact with them over a web browser or with a phone application. And trust me when I tell you this, developing an application for a phone is almost the same thing as developing a web application. And nowadays with hybrid frameworks, people are trying to reduce the repetitive work that is done. That okay, you make a web application first, you make a phone application later. They're trying to code once and so that it works for both web and phone. And then of course all those progressive web apps and everything. So yes, I would say it is important to have web dev, since it's very easy to get started with web dev. You can gain a lot of experience in JavaScript very easily. And because the way things are working right now is that you there's a lot of abstraction that has been done till date. So even though I explained about all those concepts like MVC, MVVM and all that, you don't need to worry about that as such now in today's world. You just need, I'll go to the next point there, and that you just need to try and understand and use the full capabilities of the framework or library you're using. That is the only reason you need to know what kind of what kind of framework or what kind of that separation of concern your project has. The language that you are using has, the framework or library that you are using has. So for example, if you're using React, you need to know that, okay, it's just a library, and this is how it works. But if you're using Angular, you need to understand, okay, I have an MVC framework. There should be a fixed model for interacting with my data. On that model, I should make a controller to create an interface. And the final view where all the HTML, etc. is, that part only interacts with the controller. Good, again, there are people uh, you can always bypass it. There's, even though frameworks have rules and everything, you can always bypass it. It's you just call it, it works. So I've seen people in code with joining the view and the model directly, and it works. But it's just not a good design practice, and it of course slows down your app. So yes, I would say web dev is still important to get a decent job, since it's just, but of course I would say don't keep it as your only skill. I would rather say keep it as one of your skills. What people make a mistake of doing is they only try and have one skill. In today's world, if you want a job, they don't appreciate if you have only one skill. Not all the time, rather. I'm just talking in general, of course. There are some really niche jobs in which they want a lot of expertise in just one field. But of course, then they want a relevant work experience also for you to be able to prove that you know that to the extent that they want you to know it. Yeah. Testing, I think, I would say get started with Jest. Uh, learn about how to get started with testing. I would say learn about assertions first. So assertions is a very easy thing to understand, and every testing framework is based on assertions only. So that gives you a good idea whether you're working in Java, whether you're working in uh, PHP, whether you're working in JavaScript, or even whatever testing frameworks exist for C++. I've never used them, but there will definitely be some. They all work on assertions. And once you understand assertions, you know how to, you know how to test. After that, it's just understanding the syntax and the way that particular testing framework works. Okay, another question. If I just want to create my own web page, if I want to create my own web page for displaying text file and videos. So as I said, nowadays you can, HTML has forms. So you, if, as long as, but okay, so Nagraj, if you're reading Nagraj's question, he's asking if there is a query input that is being taken from the user, right? And I know you will say that HTML has a form which you submit and voila, the data goes to the backend, right? But what you may be missing to understand is that that is happening through JavaScript. So that is where Ajax comes in. So Ajax is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So in synchronous programming, what happens is you you request the server for the page and the whole page loads. But in asynchronous, what happens is it recognizes or understands that, okay, there is some small change that needs to be done on the web page, and it loads that data asynchronously, that is without reloading the whole web page or without pulling the full web page from the server. So for example, the easiest example I can give you for understanding Ajax is on cricket score. Okay, you are watching the live cricket score on Google. Okay, what is happening there? The you know that, okay, right now this man is batting, this man is bowling. You know right now which country is in the batting, which country is bowling. So that will not change. What will change after every 3 or 4 seconds is the number of runs scored and the target, how far you're away from the target, and number of runs scored by each particular batsman, right? So only that data can be polled, or you can send an Ajax call only for that particular data to the user, to the server. And only that data needs to get updated. You don't need to reload your full web page and waste your time and internet for getting that data. So if your website has Ajax in it, you can just update it like that. So you can say, okay, every 5 seconds I should, or even 15 seconds, every 15 seconds I should update the score on my cricket news website. Okay, Sahil asks PHP or JS, which will be preferable for web for freshers. I personally work with PHP, so, but it's still an outdated language. PHP is only, if you want to learn PHP, I would say go for Laravel. That's a really nice framework. And because it is very much relevant, people still use, if they're using PHP, they're definitely using Laravel. Nobody uses vanilla PHP anymore. But of course, since you said web for freshers, I would say definitely start with JavaScript, because even with PHP, you need a lot of, PHP is a server-side language, okay? And as I said, JavaScript is a client-side language. So you need a lot of stuff to happen at runtime while interacting with the user to, so that on your website, okay? So even otherwise you'll end up, you need those Ajax calls to go through. So you can't just have a website that is running pure PHP and no JavaScript, no Ajax, nothing. Yes, Node.js can be used to run JS in the back. I think I'd explained that. Um, any other questions? Sahil and Nagra, did I answer your questions? And Neil also, yeah. Did I answer your question? Vipul, anything else you'd like to add to that? Okay, okay. Nagaraj, anything else? No need to call me sir. I graduated just like I didn't even graduate a year ago. So, yes. Any other doubts, anyone? It can be about anything related to JavaScript or web development or anything, since the topic is technically web development also. Okay, till that time, I'll just give you all a brief over the different stuff that is happening. So, one sec. Ah, so one, so as I said, why JavaScript runs on websites, on web browsers, is because each web browser has its own, what they call as a JavaScript engine. So it has an engine which can run the JavaScript on the client side. That is why you should have a web browser downloaded after 1999, because all of those web browsers have JavaScript engines. But even some of the older ones also do. But yeah, V8 JavaScript engine of Chrome is the most powerful. That is also why Chrome is very fast. And as you can see, what they describe is Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. So it creates a runtime for JavaScript. It creates a runtime environment for JavaScript on the server. Next up, we have React. React, as we clarified, is a JavaScript library. Okay, it's not a framework. Many people confusingly call React a JavaScript framework. It's not. Angular, again, Angular, by the way, there are two different versions. Okay, there is Angular.io. This is Angular.io, which is currently managed by Google. And then there is the old version of it called Angular.js, which is, Angular.js was using normal JavaScript, okay? And as you can see, it's in long-term support mode. Means there are still a lot of projects that are still running JS, but it's not in active development anymore. Then they made, after Angular JS came Angular. So Angular JS is technically referred to as Angular version 1. And then, yeah, yes, version 1.8. So all versions, and Angular 2 onwards. So right now, I think we're in Angular 8 or 9. I'm not really sure, but yeah, Angular 2 onwards, we are in Angular.io. So that's way, way more powerful. But just one heads up, the Angular Node.js needs like 4 GB of RAM. So on my old government laptop, it is to take a solid 1 minute. Like I used to hit save and the new web page used to render after like 1 full minute. So I know I said here that these are the only things that you need, but you need a good amount of RAM also to be able to compute those changes in real time. Lastly, we have Vue. So I have worked with React and Angular and Node. I'm getting started with Vue. And Vue was created by one guy who left Google Angular uh, project, and he started his own thing. So it's pretty much similar to Angular, but they say it's much faster, and because it's an MVVM model. So as I explained, it's just a view model, and that is preferred for single page application. Here, so Vue is on an MVVM model. So whether they feel that when a view and the model interact with each other, it's very fast for single page applications. But there are still some people who believe that, okay, no, you should separate the logic properly of the what is the data, what is the view, and you should keep these two things separate and make them interact only through interfaces. One chat. Angular or React or Vue, which one will you prefer? Any reason? So if you ask me, I would say it depends on your application. So for example, Angular is a very good MVC framework. So it has proper separation of concern between the data and the data and the UI. So basically between backend and front end. So you can, and I would prefer that when I'm building a proper full stack application. But if you're getting your data from, you already have a backend server set up. For example, if somebody has already set up a Node.js server for you already, you may not necessarily need to create models around that. You can directly set up a front end for that, and that should be done with it. And then you can use Vue. React, of course, doesn't have models as such, but since it's a library, but React also has a proper way. It has a separation of concern, but again, it's not, you can do it on an ad hoc basis and do it. So whenever you ask these kind of questions, right, you should always ask yourselves, what is your end application going to look like? Does that answer your question, Sahil? Or any specific, or do you want me to explain a bit more about that? Thanks, Devraj. Sahil, can you hear me? Sahil, I don't know your last name. Sahil who asked the Angular or React or Vue question. I'll just share the feedback link. So while these people ask their questions, you can fill up the feedback form. So be honest, it's completely anonymous. So you can fill in your feedback anonymously. You don't have to enter your name or anything. Be honest. Tell us what we did well, what we didn't do well, what each speaker could do better. And yes, any other questions, then just let me know. I'll just share the PPTs, and we will also be sharing this recording of this session. So Vipul is asking a question. Yeah, we also have a Medium account. We'll be announcing that soon. But we have if you have visited our website lately, there's a new section there called /blog. So that redirects to our Medium account. And since it's our 1-year anniversary, we'll be announcing that. So yeah, you can contribute over there, and we'll be launching a detailed post about how you can contribute over there. You can not just talk about events. Okay, we don't want like an event review or anything like that. You can, even if you have some new technology that you have studied for a bit, but you're not confident enough to give a session yet, but you can just write like a 1 or 2 page summary on that technology, why it's interesting, why it's new, what would attract people to it, and you can post that on our blog. Vipul asked a question, so I'll just answer that. Does it get confusing? What would get confusing is hit dev cluster.community is not secured. Hit HTTPS. That is that. Then you get the secured one. Does it get confusing? I would not. I would say no because each project that you work on, I would say, would last at least a month, right? So while you are working on that particular project, you will learn the new syntax, or if you're already familiar with that syntax, you'll know how it works. So yeah, actually that depends on you. There are people who forget syntax very easily. But I know that a lot of you don't like college and everything, but colleges do explain one thing properly, that the language that you're coding in shouldn't matter. The concepts that you're using while coding, those are what that you need to pay attention to. So, for example, there are some Vipul, the blog section is not on the website. Anyway, what I was talking about was in college, there are like some subjects that we don't pay attention to most subjects, but some subjects that we learn in our degree do matter, like data structure and algorithms, database management, even system analysis and design. I don't know and software engineering, object oriented programming. Then subjects like these do matter because visible in the sidebar on mobile version. Okay. Yeah, so subjects like these do matter uh, in the real world because that's how you become a better coder. Mm. Yeah, that's just my personal opinion. I know I'll get a lot of hate for this. That pay attention to your lectures. You don't have to pay attention to your lectures, but what I would do is I would at least pay attention to, okay, if I ever need this knowledge, where can I get it from? So like keep in your head a list of links or textbooks that you could refer to if you ever need to start improving upon that area of your coding. Right. So if suppose you're given a database intensive task, you need to know, okay, these are the database concepts that I had studied in college. These are the ones that I need to improve upon. So keep a list of resources that handy for all those things that, okay, hey, so that you can immediately get started with it. Otherwise, you'll spend like what? See, when in the real world, you won't be given a month to study a particular subject. They'll give you like 1 week and they'll tell you by next week we want the whole project ready. Okay, they won't even give you like 1 month to study, 1 month to code, nothing. So if you're given a deadline of 1 week, you will not have the time to sit and start studying that subject from scratch, right? So that is why you need to keep that knowledge like at least at the back of your head, that hey, this is how the basics of it work. Okay, this is where I can study the stuff that I don't remember anymore, because of course nobody remembers everything immediately. It's your 4 years of engineering is a lot to remember. Satyam Mane, can you just explain your question? You mean sources of what? Yeah, that's about it from my side. If you have you filled a feedback form? I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll So if you have any questions, you can still ask. Okay, while you are explaining about the books and all, yeah. So those only. You need to like keep like your own list of stuff to study, where to study it from. Fill the feedback form if you haven't already. I'm not seeing a lot of responses there. I'll just share the link to the feedback form again. So I see a lot of people. So yeah, I see 31 participants. That includes me. So I want 30 responses on the feedback form. Okay. Okay. Shrey is asking a question. How would I recommend getting started with the server side of things? How to get so the easiest way to get started with anything I would say is to make a project in it. So as much as you sit and study it, study books. Uh, so what my personal approach is, I always trust books a lot. So I dedicate like a week to learning the book properly first, and then I code. But if I didn't code, I would still, if I didn't get hands-on practice, I didn't get my hands dirty in that particular thing, I would never I would never gain knowledge in that particular library, framework, language, whatever. So how to get started with Node.js? So to get started with Node.js, JavaScript should be strong since that's the core of it. Just vanilla JavaScript is fine. You don't need to learn. Don't need to be good with Angular and all. Again, you need to understand why exactly your app needs Node.js. So like, why is that much of server-side scripting, that much of server-side calculation required in the first place? Because servers are expensive, man. So if your application is just doing a lot of server-side computation for no reason, then you need to take a call there. So yeah, understand why Node.js is the best option for doing it. Node.js compared to all server-side languages is the easiest to do. So that is always a good place. And it's very easy to get started with Node.js and XML, Ajax and all. One more thing that I forgot to mention to you all is, or rather, it's not important, but this is the crux of what Ajax is, okay? XML HTTP request. So that's what, Sahil, I'll come to your question, okay? So Ajax and even Node.js and all, they all work around this XML HTTP request object. So if you're getting your hands dirty directly in something like Node.js, you need to start worrying about things like this. But if you're working in something like Angular or React, you just need to understand, hey, someone object called XML HTTP request is sent and I get a response from that. Server side of things in general, what else is there in server side? Async await, promises, yeah. Again, first thing I would say to get started is, as I said, I've said this already and I'll say it again. Understand why you need what you need and what someone is recommending you to use, why you need it. So only then you'll understand that how to use it properly. Anything else, Shrey? I'll move on to Sahil's question. Should someone focus on more basic JS in depth? Should they learn basic quickly and pick up? Yeah, Sahil, these are the two ways to learn right now. And I would say both, there's no correct way, there's no wrong way to do it. Depends on how much time you have and how much patience you have, honestly. You could either focus on the basic in depth and then jump to a framework, or there are people whom I know who don't know any basic JavaScript and who have started with Angular and React and they've still done great. Okay, so as long as your concepts of your core programming concepts are clear, you can get started right away. But again, I wouldn't say there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. It's just personal opinion. I personally like to get myself acquainted with the basics first, see what is happening under the hood. And like even when I was learning to drive a car when I turned 18, in college, I was learning about mechanical engineering. So I paid a lot of attention to how a car works, to understand how to drive a car. So that's just how I work. But you don't need, you don't need to understand how a car works to be able to drive a car, right? You just need to know, press your accelerator, press your brake, press your clutch, and when to press each of these. That's it. Okay, if there are no more questions, we'll close the session.